Artificial intelligence has risen from a plain technical challenge to become the leading geopolitical issue in 2025. This episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, recorded in advance of AI Field Day, features Dr. Bob Sutor, Mitch Ashley, and Jim Czuprynski discussing the balkanization of AI globally and the implications for it on the future of international relations and, of course, technology. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where we bring together a group of IT experts to discuss a single idea or key concept in the industry. This podcast features a variety of perspectives from members of the Tech Field Day delegate community. And this week, we're recording it in association with our AI Field Day event, which is happening tomorrow, January 29th and 30th, 2025. Tech Field Day is part of the Futurum Group, and this podcast is also published on our sister company site, TechStrong TV, as well as TechStrong AI. On this episode of the podcast, recorded ahead of AI Field Day, we're talking about the geopolitical implications of AI and the many ways that AI has risen to become the key political national topic in 2025. Before we get started, though, let's meet who's on the panel today.
Hi, I'm Jim Czuprynski. I'm a technology consultant for Zero Defect Computing Incorporated. Been doing IT for about 4 decades, everything from Oracle database administrator all the way to application development, business development, and I'm kind of the Bob Euchre of many of my colleagues because I've probably left more companies than I've joined. But I'm just really glad to be here today discussing this really interesting topic.
And I'm Mitch Ashley, and I lead one of the practice areas in Futurum Group research organization analyst area. I cover software engineering, application development, DevOps, and I am the Marvin Minsky fanboy of the podcast today.
I'm not sure I can come up with a name like that, but I'm Bob Sutor. I've been working with the Futurum groups for about 10 and a half months here. Unlike Jim, I worked for IBM for 39 years, and then finally someone said you were allowed to leave. It wasn't sort of a lifetime thing. So, but during my time there, I'm a mathematician, so I spent a lot of time in IBM research, mathematics. We did things that we now call AI. We did machine learning, right? We did deep mining. We did optimization, all sorts of things. However, I did move over into quantum computing, and that's the sort of thing I've been doing. As I say on LinkedIn, I do AI, and I do quantum computing, but not always at the same time. And that itself is a story unto itself. But it can't escape talking about AI every single day somehow, some way.
Well, it seems like that's a really good introduction, Bob. I'm Stephen Foskett. I'm the organizer of the Tech Field Day series, and you'll find me on a lot of the TechStrong and Futurum channels as well. As Bob said, you cannot escape AI. That is really the leading topic. I mean, whether it is, no matter which nation you're in, no matter whether you are a tech nerd like some of us, or a politics nerd, or a simple regular person out there just trying to do your work and live your life, AI is everywhere. It is the big topic. And we're being told by sort of the political pundits that this is the geopolitical concern that they're most worried about going into 2025. So let's talk about that first. What is it about AI that makes it so important internationally and globally? Bob, do you want to kick us off with that? Why is AI a special topic as opposed to all the other technical things?
Sure, and I want to insert one word here, which is sovereign. And sovereign refers to, usually it's a country, but it could be a region, could be like the EU or other parts of the world, where they somehow say this technology is just so important to us moving forward that we have to have a lot of investment, we have to have the right talent, we have to ensure we have a secure supply chain to keep doing this. We absolutely see this in AI. Really, I would say for the promise of AI. For all we talk about it and all the examples, people are saying, well, what will AI ultimately be able to do? And we don't want to miss out. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of money. We've seen that in the US, right, last week, where they said they would invest a ridiculous amount of money, which is like far more than most of these companies are worth altogether. But that's another story. So this idea of people stepping forward, they're doing it for a lot of reasons. We saw during the COVID pandemic, suddenly there was a shortage of chips, right? Where are they going to come from? So the US responds with chips and science, which feeds into AI and other technologies as well. So it's freedom of action, I think, is the real key. Ownership of information, privacy issues, and not letting someone else do anything better than you can. And there's certainly historical precedents, like the Apollo program, going way, way back, right? Where you want to be able to beat your chest and say, we do this better than everyone else. But there's also a fear, if we don't do it better than everybody else, we're in big trouble.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the chips situation of COVID. In some ways, it's like what we see happening in the in the business enterprise world of kind of FOMO, not wanting to get left out on the AI train, even if they don't know what their strategy is yet. But you got to have a strategy. I think countries, regions, they don't want the same creation of the Taiwan as the center of the earth for chip manufacturing. We don't want that for AI, or they don't want the U.S. to be the nuclear power of AI, dominant a country to dominate the rest of the world. They want to be part of that race to take a place in having some role, at least their own capability, not be subservient to other countries or organizations. So I'd say, kind of national, international FOMO.
Mitch, that's a really interesting perspective on that, because just as we were chatting about this, I pulled up an article from NPR, and it basically said Greenland has got an immense store of rare earth minerals, and that's why everyone's interested in them. It's from October of 2019. Okay, so and here we are, where we've heard some rather interesting saber rattling and concerns from countries in NATO, like what would that even mean if suddenly Greenland became the 51st state, 52nd state, right? But there's definite interest in this supply chain aspect. And I think that goes back to Bob's point about the sovereignty of this. It's not just the human capital, right? The discussion we just had recently here in the US about H-1B visas and about retaining the smartest people and giving them a place to live and stay so that we can keep their brains, basically, right? Definitely the geopolitical aspect of this is something that's going to be with us for at least the end of this decade, I would guess.
And I think new, for example, treaties and alliances have risen up in the last few years. AUKUS in particular is especially important. So AUKUS is Australia, the UK, and US. Now, this grew out of originally a deal with the French about submarines, but it has since become a much more significant technological treaty. In fact, I was related to quantum computing. I was at a meeting at the Pentagon to talk about some things that were happening there. And the Pentagon, the DoD leader said, okay, before we start, just realize that everything here is about AUKUS. It's not just us. It's not just the US. It's about this particular treaty. Well, there are other ones because it goes back to supply chain, as you said. And the devil's always in the details. It's great to say that you're going to build the best facilities and infrastructure and software. The US dominates software, historically has dominated software. However, we're seeing other centers for some of the, has dominated software, like the Netherlands. Huge investment in photonics. And when you talk about AI, you talk about high bandwidth communication of data. The future is photonics. Where's that coming from? Are we doing it here in the US, or is it coming from somewhere else? We better make those arrangements and stop just having attitude.
Well, I think that's maybe why this is such a geopolitical issue, is because, in just the last 5 minutes, you folks have touched so many hot buttons and so many political issues. We've talked about raw materials and sort of national control and national ownership of raw materials. We've talked about manufacturing, the basic manufacturing and packaging of chips. We've talked about the design of hardware components. We've talked about software systems that run this. We've talked about, well, we haven't quite yet talked about model training and data sources, but I'm sure we will.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things have geopolitical implications. They're all coming back to treaties and international laws and standards and norms in different countries. And every country, I think, ultimately sees AI as a technology that is transformative so transformative potentially that it is an opportunity to upset the apple cart in a way that no technology has, maybe since the integrated circuit or the invention of atomic or weapons. I mean, there's really no technology that has such incredible potential to change the world and the way that everyone lives their lives. And so many aspects of it are tied into all these different things. Let's take it up a notch here and look at the question of data, training, model ownership, open source models, all that. We have literally talked about raw materials in the earth. Let's talk about that aspect too. Tell me, I mean, how do you see that having international implications?
Well, I don't know if you were going to bring up the US AI Diffusion Framework, Stephen, which is an export control oriented, but it's really about information sharing about security threats that can be introduced both in models and also sharing of data across models and having at least a channel for communications. This comes out of CISA in part in several organizations around wanting to put something in place before we need it. Maybe we already do, I'm not sure. But I think it's a recognition of, this is usually something we do long after, okay, we probably ought to try to secure this now. You can argue whether it's long after yet in the world of AI, but it's certainly going to evolve fast, continue to evolve very quickly. Who knows what AI will look like in five years or so. So there's that information sharing about models and security threats to models, which, with a cyber background, that's highly interesting to me.
The interesting thing from my perspective, being a database administrator, right, is okay, I'm the guy that's going to have to load the stuff that's going to go into your corpus, right? If we're doing a private model, there have been some fascinating articles in the past year about, well, where is this data coming from? How is it getting into systems? And interestingly, two things I found, back to our geopolitics again, a lot of the data entry is actually happening in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's interesting in Nigeria, Kenya, where there are English-speaking, well-educated people, right? But the other aspect that I found fascinating was, they're also using AI to generate the data that they want to enter into AI. And I'm just like, can we just take a pause here for a minute to decide whether we're actually getting meaningful data? Because that is really scary. The New York Times did a brilliant article maybe about 2-3 months ago where they're talking about a reversion to a very narrow mean, MEAN, not meme, and just how if you keep doing this, you're going to end up with just this kind of merged face, one bland face that's gray and has no color in it. Because again, maybe there's just not enough raw data. And we haven't even talked about what does that mean to creators? What does that mean to people going, no, you can't take my article. And if you do, I'm going to charge you. Intellectual property lawyers are probably going, as to what they're going to be able to do. I mean, there's so many fascinating aspects to this.
There's a phrase which is a little scary, although it's so apropos, which is called model collapse, right? Which is AI produces content. You feed that, as you said, Jim, into AI, and then you take that out and you feed it into AI. And if I can throw a little math here, let's say you have a 90% chance of being correct because whether it's hallucinating or whatever the reason. Okay, well, if you always have a 90% chance of being correct, if you do that twice, you have an 81% chance of being correct. Right? You keep multiplying to this 0.9. eventually that becomes a very, very small number. Yeah, a very, very small probability of being correct. And this is the issue. And I think a lot of people, for all the hoopla and talk about AGI, and this future, systems, we're really just in the first generation of what we're doing here. We are hitting really basic walls with some of the generational AI technology. I mean, they're looking for new content. Some of the new suggestions they have are like so trivial, like, hey, let's stop and think a little more. It's like, could you express this more technically? Oh, yeah, we have a fancy name for it. But it's really like, yeah, ask a question, wait 10 seconds, and then give it the answer, right? It's like brilliant. It's brilliant science. So, yeah, it's going to look a lot different in 5 or 10 years, and the techniques will look a lot different. Even like transformer models, well, maybe those are not the most perfect way. You can't sit and train a model for 3 months, right? Models have to continuously learn to do these. And also, I just want to throw in one word we missed in the first part here, which is Skynet, right? So AI systems, not large language models, large action models, right? Don't just tell me words, do it.
Well,
Right?
that's an interesting aspect, isn't it? Because so far we're still dealing only with words.
Mm,
And for all the talk that we've had of large language models becoming artificial general AI and so on, as we heard from Jensen Huang during his keynote at CES just a couple of weeks ago, AI in the real world has very little to do with large language models.
mhm,
Language models are one thing. The real world is an entirely different thing. And if we want AI to be functional in a sense of, able to generate something other than text, then it's going to require an order of magnitude more hardware and training and so on. At least it's also going to require AI to have some ability to understand the real world, the laws of physics, and sizes and dimensionality and things that it cannot comprehend so far. So it's all well and good to train a model based on every piece of writing ever written. But does every piece of writing ever written actually express the real world? No,
mm,
certainly not. And if you look at, babies, they're not verbal for a year plus, and yet they're able to function in the real world. It's a completely different thing to have an actual intelligence than it is to have something that simulates intelligence through the creation of words and
mhm.
stringing together words. And I don't think we're there at all. And I think to the point that Mitch was making about the AI diffusion framework, I think there's an understanding of that in the at least in academia, that we're really at the early stages of this. Like Bob, you said this too, Bob. We're really in the early stages.
Mhm.
What happens next? Countries want to get in front of that. Companies want to get in front of that. People want to get in front of that. They want to direct that. So what does happen next? What is the geopolitical aspect? What can we look forward to or fear in 2025 and beyond before we get to Skynet?
If I could just mention one little twist here before we jump into this. So Gen AI, of course, is the big thing that people talk about. And we talk about open AI, right? I mean, this was, who wrote that paper, right? The seminal paper on generational AI? Google. Google wrote it. It's a classic paper. Now, Google certainly has some very good AI facilities, but they are not getting quite the attention, shall I say, as a few of these other ones as well. So that is those who come in early may not ultimately make this technology practical or evolve it in other ways. So just Stephen, just going to what comes next is not necessarily a story of the same old players, right? As we do new and interesting things.
Well, I think there's also a lot of fear driven around the action of international bodies, organizations. So the attempts to regulate it that we've seen in the EU, which, any of those regulations, there are consequences, right? There's collateral damage. Apple decides not to release Apple Intelligence in the EU because of it. Was that warranted or not? I don't know. But there's sort of the fear to clamp down. And I think one of the reasons is we've all, you were talking earlier, Bob, you mentioned about, suddenly agentic is the word, right? We're all talking agentic, and where did that come from? And I think, I don't know if I Googled it or I chat GPT'd it a while back, but it comes from a concept of agency that people have, humans have, of, AI agents being able to be independent and self-running, self-sustaining. And I think there's a lot of fear of that, of is if somebody takes AI to the next level, where instead of informing us of better information, like, here's a great itinerary while you're visiting Italy next month, Mitch. Here's what you should do. Now I have to go organize all of that. But if it would actually take action for me and go schedule all that and deal with the logistics of the doing part, now you've got AI that can, take action. You've got the Whopper computer, right, that can simulate and control the defenses as well as offensive weapons or information warfare, whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot of fear going to be driving the actions of bodies and organizations because of that fear of AI being able to take action.
And interestingly, just last week, the Stargate $500 billion, I'm not sure if that's all funded through venture capital or private capital, but I believe Oracle and OpenAI were putting in 100 billion, I think, towards that. And it's interesting because being an Oracle ACE director, I've dealt a lot with Oracle Healthcare, which used to be Cerner Healthcare. And Larry Ellison seems to be very interested in leveraging AI technology, really machine learning and other, pattern recognition type things to, cure the next how long have we been had a war on cancer? Uh, but again, amazing breakthroughs that could still come from that. But now we're back into, well, whose data are we going to give for that? Right? Where are we going to get that data from? Informed consent comes into play. Is this just people that want to live forever? What's driving that investment? And I'm sorry, not to go conspiracy theory, but is there something really underneath the covers here that, we're really trying to drive through? Maybe the reason we want to use nuclear power for driving data centers is to really get more nuclear power out there. I don't know. There always seems to be you peel this onion uh, and you see a lot of different things all the way, there are law of unintended consequences type things that could happen.
For some reason, the old idea of conspiracy theories, you got to be careful. There's some pretty crazy ones, but just because you're paranoid
Sure.
doesn't mean they're not out to get you, right? Don't just throw it off. Well, let's look at this a little more closely.
Right.
And the Stargate concept, Mitch and I talked about this on TechStrong Gang last week. The interesting thing there to me was that seems to be a response to the AI diffusion framework and also to the overall, back to the topic at hand, the premise of this podcast, the overall balkanization and nationalization and national priorities for AI. It is no surprise that Stargate is very much in line with American and allied geopolitical desires. It is no surprise that what they've put together is a coalition to build something that would be very much in line with what the desires of the political leaders of the, sort of, 19 Western nations or whatever, what they are looking for. I would suggest that we're probably going to see similar national let's say, sovereign AI solutions in various areas. I would be shocked if China doesn't have a Stargate of their own in development, and we might not even hear of it. I would be shocked if there isn't another Stargate in some other geopolitical center, like the Middle East, for example, where they have the funding, they have the infrastructure, they have the education, and the desire to be important on the global stage. I would also not be surprised to see a European Stargate from the European Union. Bob, what do you think? What are going to be the AI superpowers?
Well, here I am going to just go back to quantum computing, just simple as a topic, just for the moment, because it's a little simpler to consider than all of AI, right? And you see this balkanization very, very clearly, right? I mean, you see what's happening in the US. The UK has a national program. Canada has one. Australia has one. China has one that presumably is spending 10 times more than we are. France, Germany, right? One after another, they are lining up, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. You know, the states, the countries are investing in this. They're getting local venture capitalists to invest in these things. So while it's but a small subset, roughly speaking, 10%, let's say, you can see what's more clearly happening, and that's even just for a future thing. But with AI, it's here, it's now. I think it's going to go back, practically speaking, to a lot of treaties. I think that, we talked about AUKUS before. Energy is going to be an absolutely huge issue, not just nuclear, but lots of aspects of this. How are we going to power? I mean, if you had $500 billion that you were investing in AI, where is that energy coming from? Where is the heat going? Yeah, maybe they want to put it in Greenland. I don't know. It's melting already, right? That's not a good thing. But this is what we're seeing, and so the tensions are there, and I think they're obscured at times with all the talk about AI. And so I think this is a good discussion to try to pull it out and look region by region, country by country, what's really happening. What are the laws? What are the executive orders of whatever flavor that people are doing, and why?
Now, here's a conspiracy theory for you. I'm not saying I believe this, but when I heard the announcement, one of the first things I thought of was, is this the Reagan era Star Wars program of trying to bankrupt Russia? This is basically, let's set that flag so far out of what we're going to spend and what we're investing, and trying to get everybody else to respond. And that's the way you take over in global dominance and in AI, because you outspend, or at least propose to outspend. Maybe companies don't, you'll go out of it, countries don't go out of existence anymore, but it could be that kind of at least pressure into the system to cause and effect. You want to have an outcome. Not saying I believe that, but it did remind me of the Reagan Star Wars program.
Well, China's kind of doing that to us, right? People are terrified of, and from a security perspective, assume it's true. It may not be, but don't assume it's false. And so there's that race. And even before Reagan, right, 1980, he was elected, came in. We had Apollo, 1961, right? And we love going to the moon. We're so smart. We love rockets and things like this. Yeah, but Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Soyuz, right? Are we going to lose not just the race and the technological and the future territory, but respect? And that, this notion of respect. They must think we're the most wonderful people in the world. Well, whether we talk about countries or regions, they're led by people, right? People with egos.
Well, and similar to the Apollo program, the Apollo program was also a way to fund development of ICBMs and tactical missile technology. And I think the same thing can be said about AI. I think that there's a lot of government and defense interest in AI as a way to fight wars in the future.
I am encouraged that there are quite a bit of AI targets that are actually trying to finalize and not procure, but come up with the best possible design for fusion. And China's using it. China just actually had a major breakthrough yesterday. You're hearing more and more breakthroughs, and AI is a great way to model this. It's really hard to build a plasma stream of, 10 million degrees? You can model it, and that's an interesting way of doing it. And back to your point, Bob, where is the energy going to come from? maybe that's part of the side effect here. We keep hoping. Clean energy, unlimited energy.
Do the chemistry, do the physics in the computer and not in the lab, right? It should be much faster. So you're driving new material science and all these types of things. So, yeah.
Well, I think that we're kind of getting to the end of the discussion here. I will give you each a chance. I guess let's go back to the premise here that AI is becoming the leading geopolitical factor in 2025. Thumbs up, thumbs down, and anything else to say? Bob, what do you think? Then Mitch, then Jim.
It is, and I'm going to stress responsible AI. I think, and I think it's a local issue. People have to understand these issues of what's important to them. I don't think necessarily it's going to flow down from the top that much anymore, to be honest with you, but you yourself have to understand the issues that are involved with respect to privacy, safety, all these other issues. So don't let that be remiss. The more you know about that, the more you'll have a better perspective of seeing what's happening at the bigger regional country levels.
I think on a global international basis, AI, what we're seeing is an immune system response to AI of what is our defense, what is our reaction. But the irony doesn't skip over me of, as such a thing that is at a global kind of international, what's the implications, national security. Meanwhile, all of us are figuring out, is it Claude or is it Gemini or what GPT model should I use to help me write better emails? What technology can span the spectrum of that gap? It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that we'll see is whether or not authenticism, to make up a word, will be something that will be interesting going forward. Whether someone will go, I guarantee you this was perfectly untouched by AI. Whether, totally created by human hands, no LLMs involved, will be perhaps a differentiator going forward. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the artistic space as time goes on.
The non-GMO for AI.
Yes, certified organic.
I love that.
Yep.
Certified organic.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, too, I think that it is very clear to me that AI is the leading geopolitical issue and will be the leading geopolitical issue. My greatest concern is that the people in power will see this as such an issue of national concern that they will not be interested in engagement and questioning and thought on it, and that it will just become a national security issue above anything else, and that will sweep away any concerns we may have of intellectual property or responsible use or, energy consumption. It will just become a national priority like nuclear weapons. So we'll see what happens with this. Before we go, thank you so much for this conversation. Before we go, I'm going to give you a chance. Tell us again your name and where we can find you and continue this conversation.
You can find me on LinkedIn, Jim Czuprynski. Just search for my name, or you can find me on also on Mastodon, but on Blue Sky, you can find me there at Jim the Y Guy. Just search for that.
You can find me on LinkedIn at Mitch Ashley is my handle there, my ID. Also check out the Futurum site. There's a number of analysts. I'm there as well. Bob is. A lot of really smart, but kind of interactive and engaging people. They're talking about the implications of AI in their respective domains. So I think that's really fascinating too. And also, you'll find us on TechStrong TV, TechStrong.tv on TechStrong Gang, Monday through Friday. Some of us are frequent guests. Bob, we need to get you on there too. So, great to have folks like Jim and Bob here.
I'm also on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, also on LinkedIn, and I also publish newsletter there and on Substack. Same content, just different places. Usually do about 3 a week. Just my interest. 2 of them are on quantum technologies, and 1 is on AI. And starts with a curated list of the most interesting recent articles, papers, things like this. So is it interesting? Is it innovative? Or maybe is it humorous, right? And I usually throw a little comment on top. But I try to keep people up, at least on what I think is important in both of these areas.
And of course, you'll find me as well on this Tech Field Day podcast, along with our weekly news rundown every Wednesday. I'm on the Tech Strong gang pretty much every Tuesday with Mitch and the rest. And of course, you'll see all four of us at AI Field Day starting tomorrow and Thursday, live streaming on Tech Strong TV and the Tech Field Day website and LinkedIn. More great AI content that's going to be going on YouTube as well. So just check out techfieldday.com to learn more about that. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do give it a subscription on YouTube or in your favorite podcast application so you don't miss an episode, which are published literally every Tuesday, so you don't want to miss it. Also, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your feedback. We'd love it to give us a rating, a review, that sort of thing. This podcast is brought to you by Tech Field Day, home for IT experts across the enterprise, which is part of the Futurum Group. For upcoming events and more episodes, head over to techfieldday.com/podcast. Visit us on TechStrong TV. And thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.